Okay, and also let's please join me in welcoming Andrea as she gives the message today. Okay. All right. Can you hear me? You can be seated. Thank you. All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Okay. Will I have it up there ever? Okay. I have it here, so that's fine. All right, I'm just going to pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you so much for the gathering of your people that happens across this nation, Father, across this world. We praise you for the body, for what you're doing here at Beit Lechem, for each person who has overcome obstacles, we know, Lord, to get here today. And we just ask that you would speak through me today, Lord. I know I'm not worthy. I know of myself I have nothing to bring. So, Father, I just ask that you would speak through me today. In Yeshua's name. Amen. All right. So, our Torah portion today, as Pastor Mike already hit on, our half Torah, Isaiah, but we are in Deuteronomy 11:26 through 16:17. And we're just going to get in. I don't know why I keep looking up there. Sorry. I'm just going to have to do this. All right. So I'm going to do just a flyover. This happens to be a long portion, and there's so many awesome quotes and just incredible verses. And I mean, how cool is just Deuteronomy in general, you know? It's like this recap of everything they've been through so far in the Torah. And so I kind of liken it to having two parents give their kids instructions, right? So you kind of get the instructions from dad, and then they go for clarification, and then mom kind of gives the instructions. And they break them down differently. One's not better than the other, but that's what I see in Deuteronomy and Devarim is this second telling of everything they've been through and breaking these things down in a new manner. And I just love the different angle the different light that is shine on the Torah and on these things. So I'm going to skip Deuteronomy 11, and then I'm going to come back to that at the very end. So we're going to fly over these other chapters and just hit the highlights and then come back. So Deuteronomy 12 covers the fact that, again, they're getting ready to enter the land. The children of Israel are getting ready to finally take possession. They're in their 40th year, right? They're waiting for the last person to die and cross over and just all of this expectation. And so it's a recap of what they're going to get into. When you cross over, a temple should be built where the Lord chooses to place his name. There's this incredible promise for dwelling in safety. Verse 10, he shall give you rest from all your enemies round about, and you shall dwell in safety. I mean, whenever you go camping, whenever you're in a tent, whenever you've just been outside of your home, you understand you are more vulnerable to the elements. You're just more exposed. And that's been their life since they left Egypt, right? They've been pursued. They've been picked off by the Amalekites. They've had struggle after struggle. It doesn't mean God wasn't with them in it, but that constant strife, that constant just being exposed. God's saying, I'm going to give you rest from that. You're going to dwell in safety, and you will have rest from the enemies round about you. I just think that's an incredible promise to God's people. So again, anytime we read these things, I'm always looking for how do we apply that to ourselves? You know, have you crossed over? If you have, then these promises apply to you. So how has God given you rest from your enemies round about? What are your enemies? What are you striving with? I know so many people, you know, normally summer is like this happy and kind of carefree, easy time. And this summer has not been that way for God's people. I know. It feels heavy. It feels like we are still carrying this heavy burden, and we have not crossed the finish line yet. And that's okay. It's the season God has us in. But what is it we are working towards? What are we gonna have rest from? It's something I've been thinking a lot about in this season. Deuteronomy 12 also deals with sacrifices and offerings that are going to be brought to where God places his name or makes his name to dwell. Okay, So, and then it's forbidden to make an offering to God anywhere else except for where he places his name. So you could still slaughter an animal and eat it, but you can't say, oh, this is going to be an offering to the Lord. That has to be done in the temple. So some of these things we just are so foreign to our way of life now. But understanding they could have meat if they wanted to eat meat. But the idea was if we're going to make an offering to the Lord, do it his way. Do it in the way and in the place that he prescribes. That's really all that's about. Yeah. And then the blood. Life is in the blood. The blood is to be poured out on the altar. So if you're not making an offering at the altar, don't eat the blood either. Still pour that out on the ground and bury it. We're supposed to have respect for these things because life is in them. But what really struck me in Deuteronomy 12 is that it kept saying, where he places his name to dwell. How profound is that term? Why not a place where his presence would dwell? I mean, how does a name dwell somewhere? I got thinking on that. What does that mean? And so I looked, the word name in Hebrew, it can be a lot of things. And it doesn't just mean your physical name is going to dwell there. It means your authority, your honor, you're putting your mark, your reputation, your position, your renown. All of those things is what God was going to cause to dwell in his temple. So when it says where my name will dwell, it means his authority, his reputation. It's where everybody around is going to come to look for the God of Israel and what he stands for. And what does the word tell us about where the temple is today? Where does that dwell today? In us, in our hearts, in each one of us, right, who's been called according to his purpose. That name dwells within us. And so it's not just that word. It's not just the 4 letters of his name. It's his mark is on us. His authority is on us. That is what we carry with us as his dwelling place. So I'm just kind of blown away by how amazing that is. But moving on, Deuteronomy 13, we've got the chapter about a false prophet should be put to death. And a false prophet is defined as one who entices others to worship idols. So, who are the false prophets of our day? I can think of a few, but in the past probably year and a half, I feel like we've heard many, in the form of the media, in the form of, even godly people, and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But to me, what is so significant right now is the prophets of fear, right? I feel like that is just all around us, and people are bowing down to fear and complacency and apathy, despondency and heaviness. So, again, what does God tell us to do with these false prophets? We're to stone them, right? We're not to give them any credence. We're not to allow them into our communities to have influence because we know they will entice people away from worshiping the one true God. So I just encourage all of us to look at our lives. Have we listened to false prophecies? Have we been enticed away from our God, even in one area, to not be wholehearted towards him? Have we been enticed away by fear or any of these other things? And are you putting those false prophets to death? Those who have spoken apostasy against our God. Anything that sets itself up against the knowledge of God is a false prophet. Amen. Anything that would have us fear man over fearing what God could do or fearing who God is and his authority in our life is a false prophet. So, again, is our God greater than anything we face in the world or not? Does our God make us to dwell in green pastures or not? Does our God promise to never leave us nor forsake us? Does our God call us and not equip us? No. And so if we are believing anything contrary to what I've just said, then we are bowing down to these false prophets in our life. We're believing the lies that we cannot, that our God isn't greater, that he won't carry us through, that he doesn't have good for us on the other side, that our greatest fears are what's true. So again, those are just some of the false prophets I thought about in today, but I know there are others in your life. Deuteronomy 14, you are the children of the Lord your God. You shall not gash yourselves or shave your head because of the dead. I read, there's several different commentaries on this verse and why it's in the Torah and what that means. But the one that really resonated with me is God is showing him to be different than the pagan nations around them, the nations that they were inheriting, the land that they were inheriting, the nation that they came from even. So many wicked pagan practices, and their relationship with their gods was one of appeasement. It was a relationship based out of fear, out of, we must do this to get what we want out of this God. We have to do this so that something bad won't happen to us. And God is saying, I don't want to be associated with those practices. So our God's motivated by love, not by an appeasement, right? He's not appeased when we suffer. And so many of the pagan practices of that time involved, cutting yourselves or shaving your head, or as we know, so many other horrid practices, offering children, in the fire. God doesn't want our suffering. He's not motivated by that suffering. He is a God of love and wants to build that relationship of love. So again, and that's kind of the cool thing too about Deuteronomy is we're sort of all over the place, right? There just seems like this just scattering of different topics all together. But when you have the time to really look at how they go together, I think it's profound as well. Just seeing the scope that God wants to be involved in every part of our lives. And so this is part of being set apart, part of not living like those nations around us, not continuing to take Egypt with us as we go into a new season and into a new place God's taking us into. And so here's just another instruction. When somebody close to you dies, I want you to handle it this way. Don't go back to the practices of the world or what you're going to find in the land where you inherit. We also have the signs for clean and animals and fish, and the list of unclean birds is repeated like we saw earlier in the Torah. And again, it's presented in just a little bit different light here. Also in Deuteronomy 14, we are told to give a tenth of all produce. It's to be eaten in Jerusalem. So what we're getting ready to celebrate this fall is Sukkot. It's also known as the Feast of Ingathering. And so as you are harvesting your crops and you're saving these things up to take with you, on to the festival in Jerusalem. Every 3 years, though, that tithe is given for the poor. So the Levites, the sojourners, the widows, and orphans specifically are who's named. These are all people who don't have an inheritance, right? So they don't have a field to fall back on if their bank account gets emptied or whatever. They don't have that safety net. And so again, I love God's economy. He says, I will build one in for my people that they won't live in, they won't have lack. There's always a way to care for one another. Also, an instruction about firstborn cattle and sheep are to be offered in the temple and their meat given to the priest. Again, provision for those who don't have an inheritance. And I love, as it talks about the grain, it says, you shall tithe without fail. It's just so encouraging. I don't know, you're just without fail. Be consistent. The system of God's, it doesn't work in isolation. It doesn't work if we aren't consistent, if we aren't faithful with our part, then somebody does go hungry, So again, how do we apply that to the body today? I think that looks like, I had a rough week and I'm tired. We're just not going to go to Sabbath service today. That we don't realize that's part of our tithe. That's part of bringing what we have to help feed somebody else around us, right? Or Or even just not keeping our word, saying we're going to do something, we don't do it, or being committed to a body. It doesn't have to be this one, but to a body where you are building one another up, being faithful in each other's lives, right? All right. So what can you give to those who don't have an inheritance? Like we said, the Levites, the sojourners, the widows, the orphans. We're not an agrarian society. Most of us don't have grain stored up, unless you have a Y2K stash left over, but or a 2020 stash left over too, I guess, right? What do you give to those who don't have an inheritance? It's going to be different for every person in this room, but our God has equipped each one of us with something that he wants us to use to bless others. Okay, we all have a widow or an orphan in our life, a spiritual widow or orphan. We have spiritual sojourners as well as literal physical sojourners that come through all the time. And then the priests, those who have dedicated their lives to service. What can we give to those around us? It's important that we look and apply these things to our lives today. All right, Deuteronomy 15 talks about the release of debts every 7 years. So release whatever is owed by your brother. You don't have to release a foreigner. So this is where we see a different law applied to those who are a part of Israel, who are walking in covenant with God, versus those, maybe you've lent land or a cow or something, to somebody who's a neighbor, but they're not part of Israel. They're not part of God's kingdom. So there are some different things there, but the idea is that you show a different level of mercy. You show just a compassion to a fellow Israelite. So, and I love verse 4 of 15. It says, there should be no poor among you. Again, it's easy to look at how some of these things are set up, not understanding when we see, slavery in a lot of these contexts. It was a system that God set up to help care for, again, let's say you have your field and your crop totally fails and your family's going to go hungry. God says, hey, this wealthy person in Israel will take your family on, or one person from your family, and they will go to work for him, but what they have will be shared with your family. They will make it. There will be no poor among you. No one's going to go hungry. Nobody's going to die of starvation or exposure, right? But that can't be perpetual, because that's not God's plan. God's plan is for everybody to be prosperous and abundant in the kingdom. And so at the end of 7 years, they're to be released to go, again, have a new beginning. But again, when I read verse 4, the first thing that came to my mind, the first thing that came to my mind was when Jesus said, the poor will always be with us. Matthew 26:11, Mark 14:7. So in Deuteronomy, there should be no poor among you, but yet Jesus says the poor will always be with you. And so there should be no poor among you, but they always will. The need will always be there. The hardship will always be there. Those who are struggling will always be there. Those who, maybe they're just the spiritually poor as well. They are bankrupt spiritually. They will always be there. And you know what? They will always be our responsibility. Always. That's not somebody else's problem. It's not the government's problem. That's one of the greatest tragedies in this country is we have socialized so many things that the church should be doing for our communities, because God says it is your problem. You are your brother's keeper. And so God's heart, Yeshua's heart, is that they would be cared for and not rejected. And as you study history, you see so many societies are separated based simply on class, simply on status, simply on how much income people have. And that was never God's heart. It was his heart to lift people out of those situations, and that you would care for your brother in that way. But verse 11 kind of affirms what Yeshua was saying too. The poor one does not cease from the land. There will always be those circumstances among you. And that release of that indentured servant at the end of 7 years, it says to send them out with a blessing. right? Don't just send them out destitute, like, all right, you've worked off your debt, now good luck. It's you set them up ready to go out and prosper again. So whatever that looks like, maybe that's with grain or money, or they now have a trade. They have something that they're going to go back out and succeed. So again, have we been spiritually bankrupt or spiritually in debt? Have we been that indentured servant? And how does God send us out? God gives us so many new beginnings. That's what I saw here. This is a new beginning for somebody. And our God sends us out equipped. He doesn't just save us and redeem us and say, okay, good luck living, in this world and this craziness. He wants us to be equipped. He wants us to spend those years as his servant. And ultimately that we wouldn't leave him. We would be like that bondservant after 7 years who says, no, I want to stay with you, my master. But either way, God does equip us, and he does prepare us well. And I'm just amazed how good our God is. All right, Deuteronomy 16. We've got commands regarding the 3-foot feasts. Passover, we already celebrated this year. And then Shavuot, we also celebrated. And we've got Sukkot. These were the 3 feasts that are commanded to celebrate in Jerusalem. That's why they're called the foot feasts, because if you didn't live in Jerusalem, you had to physically travel there. And it says, all should appear before the Lord, none empty-handed. All the males were required, but many times the whole families would go to Jerusalem. If you were sick or frail or for some reason couldn't travel, I love this. You're not left out. God says, you know what? Exchange what you would have brought and exchange it for money. Sell it, whatever. And then use that and rejoice where you're at. But if you can, somebody from your family would have represented the family and come to these feast days. So again, we've got commands regarding those feasts. Verse 17, each one with the gift of his hand, according to the blessing of Yahweh your Elohim, which he has given you. So we still have several weeks before Sukkot starts, the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of Booths, where we sell, again, so many things to focus on for Sukkot. But I want you to start thinking, what are you going to bring? We've got Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot. What will you bring? What have you been planting all year? What did we plant at Passover? What have you been planting in your life? And I know some of you are thinking, I have nothing to bring. I didn't plant anything. I haven't been faithful. I haven't been doing a good job, right? It's not too late. That's not too late. I love that about our God too. Every Sabbath is a new beginning. Every week, every day, every morning, his mercies are new. So say, you know what, God, I'm sorry. Maybe I did squander the time you gave me, but I want to start over because I want to have something to bring you on these feast days. And what is that going to look like? What's your harvest going to be? I don't know. Start asking him now. Start getting excited. It's so cool to start thinking that you're going to be bringing something that's necessary for the kingdom. Without you bringing that, there will be a lack. And so, God, what is that? It's not my job, right? It's not just my job or just the pastor's job or just that person's job. It's the kingdom. It's the community to be doing these things. So really, I challenge you. Ask God, what is it I've been planting? What have you been walking in? Have you set new patterns? Have you been, really focused in maybe some new areas of the word you haven't focused in before? That's what you've been planting. That's what you've been working in. So it's not too late. Don't believe that lie. Don't give up. You can still reap a harvest, and God will use that. We see it every single year at Sukkot, how God uses people and in just incredible, miraculous ways. So start getting excited about what he's going to do. All right. I'm coming back now to Deuteronomy 11. Is there a pointer on this or no? A laser? Oh, strobe. Okay, I pushed both. Oh, there we go. Cool. All right, so, yeah, sorry. Deuteronomy 11. Again, how this portion starts, and I think it's like everybody's favorite, right? The blessings and the cursings, and choose life that you might live, and the blessings are incredible. But I just want to point out, and it says, this really kind of funny thing. We're going to put the blessings on Mount Gerizim, and the curses will go on Mount Ebal. I just think it's an interesting way of putting it. We're going to put blessings here, we're going to put curses here, but this is the two mountains, obviously, as you've been looking at it behind me. And in the valley between is the city of Shechem, named after an ancient, tribal ruler. His name was Shechem. Over here, the Mount of Cursing. This is to the north, down here is south, so west and east. So we've got Jordan River is over here. Now, again, as I started digging into, the significance of this place, and I just started finding a lot of different things happened here. So the valley between these two mountains, has great historical significance. This is the first place Abraham stopped when he entered Canaan. So as he traveled through, crossed that border into the promised land, this is where he first stopped. This is where God confirmed the promise of the land to him, not Tom, to him at the Oak of Moreh. Jacob settled here, dug a well after reuniting with Esau. He built an altar and called on El Elohe, the God of Israel. This is where Dinah's defilement happened and the ensuing attack on the city by her brothers. Can we go to the next one? All right, so again, putting this into perspective, we've got Shechem here. Here's Jerusalem. We've got the Dead Sea, Jordan, the Galilee area up here. And so this is it is sort of a central place. Obviously, there's a lot more of Israel down here, and there's more up here. But around these areas, and especially we know like where Yeshua traveled, this would have been a common place that you would have gone through, kind of a trade route, if you will, or a well-used path. So our Mount of Blessing, our Mount of Cursing, as Abram came through, and he would have stopped right here in Shechem first. Jacob buried his foreign gods, and he committed fully to Yahweh in Shechem. This was after, right, his time, after gaining, all his wives, his children, and all of his wealth. This is where he said, all right, I'm done. I'm done with all the deceiving, all the running, and he fully committed. He cleaned house. This happened in Shechem. Joseph, when he went to seek his brothers, they were in Dothan, which is very close, just a little bit north of Shechem. It's not on this map. But he was sold into slavery instead in Shechem. It was here that Joshua commissioned Israelites to build an altar on Mount Ebal upon crossing the Jordan. Those of you who went on the last trip to Israel also got to see that altar, which is actually on this side. They looked for it on this side of Mount Ebal, couldn't find it, but it's here, which makes sense because as they crossed the Jordan, they came right here, built an altar. Why did they assemble on a mountainside? Why is there an altar there? Because this is natural amphitheater. Our group got to go to this altar, and it actually happened to be on Thanksgiving Day. We had to get an army escort because we were in the, a Palestinian-controlled area. It was quite a trek down to this altar, but it was incredible, really incredible. We had 3 army guys with us, our escort, and they're just doing their duty, right? So they're standing around. Our guides going through all the archaeological stuff with us, and we're like all fascinated. And you kind of notice after a while, these 3 guards really start to key in to what he's saying. They really start paying attention, and you realize they've never heard this history either. This is relatively newer discovery in Israel. I mean, it was kind of first excavated in 1980, but it's not a tourist site. Hardly anybody has ever gone there with tourist trips. And so these guys didn't even know the significance of the place. They were just, escorting the tourists and doing their job. But once they started realizing this is truly one of the oldest altars that they found in Israel, just the weight of that as the people crossed into Israel, this is where they stopped. This is where they built an altar to the Lord. This is where they would have worshipped on this mountain. And this is where they would have also stood to recite the curses. These three guys, they came to attention. Their whole demeanor changed. They weren't just slack anymore. They were invested. They realized this is holy ground. They started picking up trash. And just the whole demeanor changed. We got to worship here, and our guide said, you're probably one of the first groups who's worshiped in this altar in 3,000 years. I mean, just amazing, to realize the significance of these places. And so we did. We also got to recite some of the curses, and it was just incredible. Just an incredible experience. So talking about these things, it's very real, having been there. They also found a newer altar on top of the old one that dates back to the time of Deborah. But this is a place of commitment and dedication. Shechem in general is. Joseph's bones were buried here, and to this day, Joseph's tomb is there. You can still see it, if they let you, depending on... midnight. They have to timeshare these kind of things with all the different religions and entities. It's complicated, but Joseph's tomb is there. Joseph, my slide's off. Okay. This is where Joshua assembled Israel and addressed them one last time before he died. This was a central gathering place for the nation, and because of its central location, Abimelech was proclaimed king here. Jeroboam fortified this city, made it the capital of the northern kingdom, which was not a good plan, but he did it anyways. And it was also named as one of the cities of refuge. No, not at all. Moses commanded the Israelites to pronounce the blessings and the curses here. Deuteronomy 27, on Mount Gerizim, we had Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. Mount Ebal was for the curse. Reuben, Dan, Asher, Gad, Zebulun, and Naphtali. So you cross over from the Jordan, but then you come to a place of many crossroads. And that, to me, is what Shechem represents. And again, I was thinking about how that applies to our life. So when we say crossover, maybe that's from death to life. Maybe that's when you first became a believer. Maybe it's when you started walking in a greater covenant or a Torah covenant relationship. Whatever that looks like, I don't know. But when we cross over, your life is not just easy at that point. It's not just smooth sailing. It's not just all downhill from there, right? So at that point, there are many crossroads. And I felt like that is exactly what Israel faced as well. They had to cross over. They're in Shechem. They're in these two mountains. And it's like, what way are you going to go? Like when your child leaves the house, they're in that place of decision. They've been through the training at home and all these things that the Israelites have had. And now they're going to be placed in their land. They're set up for success. But what will they do? They are at those crossroads, and we are often at those crossroads as well. How are we going to live these things out in our lives? What way are we going to go? The way of blessing or the way of cursing? And I just love how visual our God is. He gave us a whole mountain devoted to each one of those things that we could see it. Like, literally, which way? Is it going to be this one or that one? It's hard to see in those pictures, but there truly is a barrenness on Mount Ebal. I mean, you see some trees or whatever, but it is bald. There's no civilization up here. From here, there are communities, there are people, there are cities up here on Mount Gerizim. So even to this day, it still stands as God's blessing and God's curse, as a sign of that in the physical. The people who came to be known as Samaritans, the Shomronim, worshipped on Mount Gerizim. They still worship on the Mount of Blessing to this day. Many of you, if you've been to Israel, you may have gotten to go and visit the Samaritan community. They're down to about 800 people in the whole world. Most of them live here at Mount Gerizim. There's a small community I think in Jerusalem or outside Jerusalem as well. Oh, you're right, Tel Aviv, thank you. Yeah, hold on. So the thing with the Samaritans, they only follow the first 5 books of the Bible. So they do not embrace the prophets or anything else. And that's it, those first 5 books. And they really, they never identified as Jews, but they identify as followers, as worshipers of the same God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there was this natural rift between the Samaritans and between the Jews. Mount Gerizim was their holy site. That's where they believe God said, this is where I will cause my name to dwell. And they had built an altar, or did build an altar there on Mount Gerizim. Of course, we believe from the rest of the Bible that God actually put his name to dwell in Jerusalem, the temple there. But that was the rift that you saw between these people groups. Jacob's well is also in the modern day of Shechem is Nablus. Jacob's well is still there. We stood on this mountain, looked down, and saw the tomb and saw the well. It's pretty cool. Sorry, the well is in the basement of a church, so you can't just see that. But you can see where these things are located. And again, I love this. So in this place is where Jesus, Yeshua, spoke to a Samaritan woman at that well, saying, I'm seeking worshipers who worship in spirit and in truth. Again, think about the significance of that place and those words to that person at that time in history. So we know the Jews hated Samaritans, and the Samaritans did not like the Jews as well. And so if you've seen The Chosen, that's just an easy recap because this played out at the end of season 1, this interaction with Jesus and the Samaritan woman. But he just broke through those cultural divides, right? And so you see these 2 mountains, you see these 2 differing perspectives, these 2 extremes. And that's where Yeshua, he went and started his public ministry right in the middle of all that chaos and all of that division. He went right to the heart of it. He didn't start it in the Galilee or, in those areas that would have been easy for him where he would have been well received. He went straight to his followers' enemies. It's not easy, but that is the God we serve. That is the heart he has, that there would be no poor among us. Those are his lost sheep. He doesn't want them to be the poor in the kingdom, the lost in the kingdom. He came for everyone. So that's some of the rift that was going on. And you can find that account in John 4, 1 through 43. So again, just another kind of viewpoint of this area, more of an aerial view. And I'm just going to leave that up. You can look at all that good stuff. But again, the people would have assembled here, and they would have had, leaders from the tribes on each of these mountains. The masses would have been here in the middle, and it was just this huge amphitheater. So as they were repeating, or speaking out those things, and oftentimes these things happen on these natural mountainsides because it was just an easy way. They didn't have microphones, so that's how these things, like when they got the Torah on Mount, Sinai, thank you, on Mount Sinai. Again, the people would have been there, they would have been right there, and just the noise and just all of that, just such an incredible thing to think about. But, I started to touch on it. What do these 2 mountains represent? To me, they represent these 2 extremes. Right? And nobody wants the curses. That's a given. Nobody wants to just walk in the cursings. We all want the blessings. We all want to have rain in its season and our grain bins to be full and our, children, just all of those things to be fruitful. But what does it mean for the people to be in between the 2? That's where the people would have been as they assembled. What does that mean for us? As I was preparing for this message, it was a super busy week. And every time I focused to get into the Torah, I just got hijacked. Something happened, whatever. It just, to where I was just overwhelmed. By Wednesday night, I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot even connect with, So by Friday afternoon, I was like, okay, I'm just not inspired. I mean, there's so much here. I don't even know, God, what the message is, though. And so I called Wendy, and, we're sort of spitballing stuff back and forth. And this is what finally resonated with me. This is what just broke me, is that these two extremes are constantly in our life. And yet we are called to walk through them, right? We don't live on the Mount of Blessing. We don't just camp there forever and ever. We have to walk through. This is our crossroads. This is what we choose to take with us. So every time we can look at somebody who's different from us, it's our nature to want to criticize or point out those differences and not make that connection with them. But how can we be between those two? How do we stand in the gap? Because ultimately, just like Yeshua did, just like Jesus went straight to that woman at the well, I believe that's our mandate too. That's our mandate as followers of the King, to emulate his life. How do we do that? We have to also stand in that gap, because there are people who do live on the Mount of Cursing, right? That's all they've ever known, perhaps, or they continue to go back to that lifestyle and think they can't. So as they're coming down off that mountain, they meet us in the valley. What are they going to see from us? What do they find? Are they going to encounter somebody that's going to make them want to do a U-turn and turn right back and say, ooh, I don't want any of what you have? That's, what do they encounter when they encounter you? Because ultimately, just like Yeshua, our example, I hope it's something that makes them want to cross over, like we've crossed over, that we can be a bridge from that Mount of Cursing to that Mount of Blessing. I believe that's what Paul meant when he said, I become all things to all people. Now that can be a very misquoted verse, misused verse. And I think people will often say that, oh, well, that just, so that means we have to compromise. We just have to, give up our ideals or, no. I don't think it means any of those things at all. We don't water down our message. We don't cease to be what we know God's called us to be. But it does mean we can remove stumbling blocks for people, right? At every turn, we can be those who set up a stumbling block and make people want to do a U-turn, or we can say, oh, you know what? Let me get that out of the way for you. Let me help you get over here. We need to be able to do that to the Jew and to the Gentile, or a better term for that is maybe the lost tribes, or to whoever that is God's put in your life. If you got to meet or be here on Sunday night, you met Chaim Mailspin, and here's a man, he has a Jewish background, but he is a follower of Messiah. He lives in the Galilee. He has a ministry devoted to bringing Jews back to their land and getting them resettled in the land of their inheritance. But he ministers to Jews oftentimes with the help of Christians from the nations, So he's in a very unique place, a very unique ministry. And I was just so impressed by the time I spent with him, seeing his heart, seeing the way that he has become all things to all people. And he doesn't compromise a thing in doing so. And we had time with him on Monday morning, and then Wendy and I and Matt were able to take him to the airport, and we just kind of picked his brain, like, how do you do what you do? And I just asked him personally, do you use the name of God? Because we know in Judaism they will say Hashem, because they feel like using his actual name is too holy. And so where are you at on that? Just curious, not a judgment, but he said, oh yeah, I definitely in my worship, I use the name. I won't around Jews though, because I don't want to offend them. And I believe, again, that's where God has put the same kind of things in my heart. So just to hear that over and over in this man, I just thought, what an amazing example of being that bridge, of being all things to all people for God's kingdom, for his glory. Chaim kept using that term, the rally in the valley. He lives in the Galilee. When he says that, he means there's a gathering in the Galilee. And what we see is often of these Messianic believers. You have the ultra-religious and Orthodox who gather in Jerusalem, and you have, just people scattered all throughout the land, but it just seems like there are many in the Galilee. We started talking, and we did this song today, Zion, O daughters of Zion, he'll bring you back home. That song's written by Aaron Schust. We were talking with Chaim about that, and he goes, oh, so you've met Joshua Aaron, you've probably met Aaron Schust too. And we were like, yeah, no, we haven't met Aaron Schust. But he's like, oh, well, he's a great guy. I actually, he wrote that song because of the Aliyah Return Center and asked me to sing on it with him, but I didn't get to. So again, we were just sort of dialoguing about that, thinking, how cool is this? That a Jewish man who believes in Messiah inspired a Christian songwriter to write a song about restoring God's people to one, in the land. That song, it's not about just returning to the physical land. To me, it's about a returning of all God's people to God's kingdom, to his Israel, to be one body, returning us to being one body in him. So, I want to relate that to our congregation a little bit, because I know we've gone through a lot of changes here. We've had a fire, we had the pandemic, we have changing leadership as well. And I know that can be a concern. People are wondering, what does that mean for our identity here? What are we? Are we a Jewish Messianic congregation? Are we just like a church that meets on Saturday instead of Sunday? I don't know. But what I do know is that our identity is probably not going to be clearly defined as one of those two things, but it's something that God gave me when I was in Israel last, when I was in the Galilee area, while we were there, because that's where Yeshua lived. He lived in the Galilee, and if you think about that area, it's between Jerusalem and it's between the Decapolis, or the 10 cities of the world, or not Israel, not God's people, but the nations, the true pagan people at that time. That's where the Galilee was. And that's where Yeshua always returned to. He would go to Jerusalem for feast days or for different things, but then he would come back to the Galilee, and then he would go to these pagan nations as well. And when we were spending our time there, I felt like God saying, this is what I've called you to. This is your identity. You are to live in the borders like I did. You are to be a minister to both of these sides. And just like these two mountains, we are to be that bridge between them. I don't know how many times Chaim used the word bridge. I don't know how many times that term has been spoken. It's been given as a vision. It's been just continually brought up here. So I do know this, that our identity at Beit Lechem is to be a bridge. And I know that doesn't make everybody happy. I know there are people who'd wish we'd be kind of more this way and other people more this way. You know what? The cool thing is we are here to make God happy. And that doesn't make all of us happy, but it makes us closer to him as we pursue him, as we press in and do what he wants. So along those lines, who knows what our mission statement is? Does anybody know it? Right? I flashed it up there real quick. This is something we want to do a better job of getting out there constantly in front of us, because this is the vision God has given our leadership here. And we're going to, make banners. We're going to get this up, because this is what needs to be front and center. Joining God's people through the love, spirit, and truth of Messiah. So I might never be able to just say, I am, this is my denomination, as much as I would love to simplify how we explain what we are. But I do know God's called me to be a part of joining his body together. And so when I've been in Israel, I've had that honor of getting to speak to Jewish people in such a way that doesn't cause a stumbling block. Now, some of those things can be, oh, well, I go to church. You would love our church. Well, as soon as you say church to a Jew, no. They would not love your church, because a church is not something that is comfortable or inviting to their mindset at all. And so just some of those little things, congregation, kahal, fellowship. different ways that we can be a bridge and relate, right? That's not how I would speak to just a fellow Christian here in the valley, though, right? We're going to use some different terminology there. Does that mean I'm compromising? Does that mean I'm, not standing firm for the Torah? No. That means I want to be all things to all people, because that is what I saw modeled by my rabbi. That's what living in the borders means to me. The verse we have for our mission, our vision statement, is Ephesians 4:16. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, it grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. We are those supporting ligaments. I feel like that's what God has shown Beit Lechem to be. We are going to be what helps support and join his body, because there are people over here who are doing his kingdom work, and they need to be doing it. So we don't need to be doing what they're doing, and we don't want them to be doing what we're doing, but we want to support and join them, that hand, to what this hand is doing, right? So that we are all building together. That's our calling. Right. Our vision is to see God's people, the house of Israel and the house of Judah, united and walking in the love, truth, and spirit of Messiah. I don't know if we will see the fullness of that in our lifetime, but I know we get to see glimpses of that every time we go out into our community, right? We have that opportunity at least. And so I want these things to get into our hearts. Something Chaim brought up when he was here was Psalms 22:3. God inhabits the praises of, we might say, his people, right? But the Hebrew there is Israel. God inhabits the praises of Israel. His people are to be one. We are to be one in him. And we are called Israel. So I just want to share a little bit how we've been able to do that in our community. It hasn't been necessarily by going out into our community and saying, hey, you should come to our church. It meets on Saturdays, and we do dance, and we do all kinds of different things. Oh, and by the way, we don't eat pork, and we do, It hasn't been by doing that. But I've been part of a group that meets on Monday nights called Stand for the Constitution. I was motivated purely because I knew I had to do something after this past year personally, given what I've seen happening in our country, given that I have 6 children and I want the world to still be a decent place for them to inherit, just given what I see is a lot of our freedoms being taken away. And so after just wrestling, I feel like God has finally put me in a place where I can finally put my energy towards something practical and useful. So this group is a great group. They're a godly group, and they are truly just standing for godly principles and liberty. So I've been able to go to this group. I've been really digging into things in our community having to do with our schools and our school board and positions that have been hiring and different things. And so the first time I go to Stand for the Constitution, they have a subcommittee that's for schools, and I just share some of the things I've been doing. And they asked me, hey, would you lead this group? I mean, I'd been there once, and I was like, okay, I'll do this. I just saw right away, wow, I just have some access and influence here that, again, I don't deserve. Through some of these efforts, we've been meeting with mayors, with city council members, with commissioners, with school board members. A few of us, Pastor Wendy, Daniel has also been getting involved. Everywhere we've been putting our hands in these things, we've been given access. We've been given this incredible favor to have influence, to have a voice that I'm continually blown away by. And I'm sharing these things not to say this is what everybody here has to do. I'm just giving you an example and maybe an ideas of what it would look like in your life. This is what it has looked like for me. But we've been able to be a bridge, and it hasn't necessarily been this huge corporate bridge, but it's been an individual, one-on-one. These one-on-one, really powerful conversations and things. It's been, again, not what I come and say about what I believe, but it's how I live my life after Shabbat, right? Sunday through Friday, that's been giving me these access to these different areas. Monday night, I will share a quick story, and then I will wrap it up. So just so you know, not going to go forever. But this Monday night, our group, the Stand for the Constitution, we were visited by a sitting school board member here. He wanted to visit our group. And so the week before he came, my little subcommittee, the school group, was like, all right, what are we going to do? We want to ask him questions. And there was all this kind of back and forth. Are we just going to like nail him on all the things that they've been doing wrong? Do we want to be over here on the Mount of Blessings and just thank him for all his service, and what questions are we going to, all this back and forth, preparing for this night. And I kind of just kept coming because, again, I was the leader. They gave me that final say, and I said, you know what? I don't know where this guy is at, so I don't think we can for sure say, hey, we're just going to hold you to account, and you should have been, I said, let's feel him out a little bit, okay? We have no idea. So he comes. I said, all I know about him is he's a believer and he's a conservative, and he's willing to come to us. So let's be flexible. So he comes to our group Monday night. Our school committee has a panel with him. We're interviewing him. He starts off just by talking, though, and just sharing. And within the first 5 minutes, we saw this man. He is a broken man. He is worn down, and he even said, I don't know if I can even keep doing this. This is the hardest job I've ever done. I'm completely alone, and I'm ready to give up, and I think I'm going to quit. And so those of us on that school panel, we kind of start looking at each other, start crossing some things off our list, and it's like it became clear really fast, we know what our job is. We need to build an ally. We need to build up this man and strengthen him. Because I think he's one of the only believers on that board, and if we lose him, we can't. God put him there for a reason. And so what followed was just such an incredible just time of encouragement, of sharing truth with him, sharing in such a way of informing him, because again, he's a teacher. Like, he just has so much going on. He doesn't have time to research all the issues like our group has been doing. He doesn't have statistics and things at his hands. But he in his heart, he knows what's right, but he doesn't know how to actually articulate that. So we were able to just empower him with good information, give him those things. But ultimately, at one point, I said, I hear you. I hear the weariness in your voice. I hear that it's hard to want to stand up and be bold right now. But I said, I want you to know this whole room of people are doing things we never thought we'd be doing. There are people here who are risking their careers, their licenses, their reputations to stand up and speak out right now and to be bold. There are introverts here going to city council meetings and speaking out. There are people praying publicly, things that we never thought we'd be doing. I said, so if our group can inspire you, I'm asking you, would you start? Would you be bold? Would you recognize that maybe God's placed you here for such a time as this? And don't give up. Please don't give up. And I just saw the transformation come over him as I spoke those words to him. It was incredible. We had a few more minutes, and then I said, okay, we're going to take a couple more questions, and then we're going to pray with you. Again, I'm sitting right next to this man, and again, I just see the shock on his face. I said, are you okay with that? He's like, yes. But he was totally unprepared for that. And guess who prayed for him? It was Pastor Wendy, because again, she's been given favor and access at these meetings as well. And so they recognize when it's time to pray, that's someone they often bring up. And so Pastor Wendy came up, charged him again, be bold, be courageous like Esther, be strong like Daniel. We need you. And then she said, if you're comfortable, we'd like to anyone who wants to lay hands on you. The entire group, 100 and some people, came up and just surrounded this man. And when it was all said and done, I looked over. I was overcome with emotion because I was so humbled that God would use us. What we thought was just going to be, hey, we want to get our issues out on the table, and can you stop critical race theory from happening, please? Those kinds of conversations. And we realized we brought a comatose man back to life. We breathed new life into him. I looked over at this other teacher who was on our panel. She was in tears too, and we just said, we are so humbled, God, that you would use us in this way, that you would use us to bridge a gap in our community like this. I had another woman, she's a district employee. She came up to me and just held me after that and just said, thank you.
Thank you for doing that. And I thought, what did I even do? I didn't do anything. Like, we just had a conversation with him. But she goes, no, you've given me hope. My job has been so hopeless, working for the district. And now I see God's moving and he's doing things and things are changing. And I have hope now for my job. I mean, I just all week, I've been so humble because I thought, God, I'm nothing. Who am I? What am I? I'm nothing, but you used me in such an incredible way. And guys, I just want to encourage each one of you. God's called you to be a bridge. He has called you to breathe life into people who are walking dead, to breathe new life. You are that new life, that breath of fresh air. You are that living water. So ask God, how can you be that bridge? How can you be his hands and feet? Who are those people in your life? It's not just my job. It's not just the pastor's job. It's each one of us, guys. And that's the beautiful thing. As a congregation, we do have a platform. It is one thing to say, I'm so-and-so, but it's another thing to say, I'm with a congregation that wants to do this or to bless in this way. Or I actually spoke with somebody who just took up a new position. It's very controversial in the school district, and we had a conversation, and I said, I'm with a church, and I have connections in the faith community. How can we be a blessing to the schools? And he was like, well, I don't know, but I will get back to you. I said, because what you're trying to do is the church's job, okay? You're trying to fix, broken homes, and that's our job. So what can we do to partner with you? And he said, I will get back to you. So again, there's so much that we can be doing. I'm excited about it. But we have to understand, again, our identity. And for me, I am solid on that. Some of you may not know where that, you may not have that same thing. And I want to say that's okay too, right? We're individuals in God's kingdom. But I know for me, he's called me to be in the borders. He's called me to be that bridge. And I believe that's what he's called Beit Lechem to be as well. So I want to encourage you in that vision. And that as we do these things, that is what we put our energy and our weight behind. In building these bridges. We are a praying church. We are committed to Colorado Praise. We are committed to 40 Days for Life. We are committed to a lot of different prayer efforts because we know the power of prayer. And I believe we are now finally starting to see the fruit of those prayers. We are seeing how set apart Mesa County is in all of Colorado, in every level. We may not see that in your day-to-day life or your job or whatever, but as I've been getting involved in these areas, I'm seeing our public health constantly defies our governor's orders, constantly defies our school board, our elected officials. Our superintendent, who is, I would say, not walking with God. I don't know for sure, just my impression of her. Just made that decision to go against Colorado Health Department, against the CDC, and to not mask kids this year in school. Well, for now. I mean, it's a huge victory. That is going against all of these things, these strongholds. And so, again, I'm humbled, but I'm seeing that's because of the prayers of the righteous. They are making a difference, and we are being targeted for those reasons, but that should encourage us to stand firm and to go forward in those things. So I've seen your hand up back there. Do you have a comment? Yes. Just that it's... Yes, so this is the valley right here, and then you've got these hillsides on either side. So if you're going to be able to hear. So again, this is natural, acoustic enhancing. Let me go back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mount Gerizim was Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin for the blessing. Mount Ebal, Reuben, Dan, Asher, Gad, Zebulun, and Naphtali for the curse. Why would the Lord? I can see why the Lord would put 6 leaders on the left. Yeah. That's a great question. So I don't think it necessarily means, oh, these tribes are cursed or we're putting a curse on to anybody. Again, what I see this as is when I take my children and I say, hey, here's what we're doing, here's the plan. I expect you to do this, and if you do that, we're going to get to go here. You'll get to have a treat, or here's your reward. And if you don't, we're going to have discipline, right? Those are the conversations I have with my kids all the time. And so that's what I see happening here is, guys, you're in the land. You've got the chance to now, we're going to walk this on your own. No more manna, no more cloud and fire by night. You're the grown-ups now. You got to do this on your own. And so, yeah. Right. Yes, absolutely. But we have to do it in such a way that speaks life. So it's speaking truth and love. Yeah. But understanding, right. And I think you bring up an excellent point. We can't just say, hey, follow God, it's great, it's great, it's great, without acknowledging there are consequences for our sin. We do have to deal with this stuff, but we don't have to. God shows us how to. It's bringing it to Him. He's the one who cleans us up, but we have to be willing to walk, to turn away from our sins and to walk into this new life. So, again, it is hope. That's right. It is hope for how to get out of these things. And I just want to end with the verse from, this was the portion of the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament that goes with this Torah portion. And this is the will of Him who sent me, that I should lose nothing of all that He has given me, but raise it up on the last day. For this is the will of my Father, that everyone who looks on the Son and believes in Him should have eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. If we know this is the will of the Father, let this be the will of our hearts as well. May we have that same heart that no one of His kingdom would be lost. So, Father, I just ask that you would cause each one of us to be that bridge, that we would have the same heart that you have, the heart that we see in Chaim and the Aliyah Return Center, that we see in so many of your servants, Father. We thank you for the example you gave us as you walked on this earth, to become all things to all people, but to do that without compromising, without becoming these things, but maintaining who we are in you. So, Father, I ask you to show each person here what that looks like for them, to walk firmly in what you've called them to, but to know how to minister, Lord, to the difficult people in their lives, the family members who don't understand the choices that they've made, but they still get together and celebrate, certain holidays together or not, or navigating so many of those decisions, Father, are real things that we face. So cause us to do it in such a way that would bring people into you, that would help build your kingdom, that would gather and not scatter, Father. And I just do pray for a gathering of your people. I pray for a rally in this valley, Father, in Mesa, this Grand Valley. We continue to claim for you. We continue to claim a unity, a tearing down, Lord, of the divisions of your body. May we stand as one, even though we may meet in different buildings, Father. Help us to be kingdom-minded and help us to stand firm and shine brightly for you this week. I pray you would encourage every person where they're feeling downtrodden, where they're feeling heavy burdened, for a release. Their circumstances might not change, but their perspective, Father, it will, as we cast our cares on you and we look to you for all things. We love you. We proclaim you are such a good God. You are such a faithful God. You are such a loving God. I thank you that we are motivated by love, that you are motivated by love. And that's the God that we serve. So may your love go forth in us and through us. I ask all of these things in your precious name, Yeshua. Amen. Amen. So I want to say goodbye to our live stream, and thank you all.